6 months after their quiet reunion in Berlin, Eun-woo and Jae-young returned to Seoul. This time, not as a secret couple dodging cameras, but as partners, steady, intentional, and deeply in sync. They didn't stage a press conference. They didn't post a heart-shaped selfie or wear matching rings on Instagram. They simply lived. When asked in a magazine interview what had changed the most, Jae-young smiled and said, "We stopped performing. We started just being." Eun-woo, surprisingly open in his next V-Live, said, "We had to learn how to love each other without losing ourselves. That takes time, but it's worth it." And so they built their life, not like actors chasing fame, but like people choosing each other every day. Their first home together wasn't a penthouse or a designer duplex. It was a small studio in Yeonam-dong, tucked above a cafe that smelled perpetually of cinnamon. There were minimal furnishings: one bed, one desk, 2 chairs, and 1 fork. The others were forgotten during the move-in chaos. But they were happy. Jae-young painted the walls herself. Badly. Eun-woo tried to assemble a bookshelf. Worse. They documented the chaos on their private channel, not for clout, but to remember it all. One night, while eating ramen straight from the pot, Eun-woo turned to her and said, "I think this is the happiest I've ever been." She replied, without looking up, "Even with 1 fork?" He nodded, "Especially with 1 fork." In early 2026, Jae-young was cast in a highly anticipated drama, The Paper Swan, a psychological thriller that would require her to take on one of the darkest roles of her career. At the same time, Eun-woo was approached by a Hollywood production, his first potential step into the global spotlight. And suddenly, their simple rhythm was tested again. "We stopped seeing each other as often," Eun-woo later admitted in an interview. "Her role consumed her. Mine took me across time zones. It was hard." What hurt more than distance was the emotional gap. Jae-young's role demanded solitude. Eun-woo's demanded performance. Arguments started over little things: forgotten calls, unread texts, silence at dinner. One night, Jae-young came home at 3 a.m., drained and distant. Eun-woo, already in bed, whispered, "Are we okay?" She sat in silence, then replied, "I don't know." They didn't break up, but they pressed pause again. Publicly, they were still together. Privately, they agreed to give each other space. Eun-woo focused on his training for the Hollywood role. He took dance classes in LA, dialect coaching, even surfed alone on off days. Jae-young, meanwhile, dove into her character, disappearing into her role with terrifying intensity. Some days, she didn't speak to anyone for hours. The role left her raw. Yet in the middle of the silence, they still reached for each other. A photo appeared on Jae-young's Instagram, a blurry image of a wave crashing against a rocky shore. No caption. Eun-woo posted a picture of a paper swan floating in his coffee. Again, no words. But fans knew. They were still tethered. Even apart, they hadn't let go. Spring of 2025 brought a strange blessing. Both stars had a rare 3-week break. And then it rained. Seoul was drenched for a week straight. One evening, Jae-young walked out of her agency building and into a thunderstorm. She didn't have an umbrella. She didn't even have her phone. Just herself and an ache she couldn't name. She walked instinctively, aimlessly, until she found herself in front of a familiar building. The studio apartment in Yeonam-dong. She stood, soaked, in front of the cafe. And then the door opened. Eun-woo was standing there, holding a small black umbrella. Neither said anything. She stepped under it. He didn't move. The rain didn't stop, but the silence broke. That night, over soggy toast and tea, they talked. Really talked. No roles. No script. Just truths. And at the end of it, Jae-young said, "I don't want a love that fits into my schedule. I want one that expands it." Eun-woo smiled. "Then, let's start again. From the rain." They didn't move back into the studio, but they kept it. It became their escape, their quiet corner of the world. Back in the public eye, they were more grounded. Eun-woo's Hollywood debut, Azure Light, became a critical success. Jae-young's The Paper Swan earned her her first day sang. But they didn't attend the awards alone. For the first time, they walked the red carpet together. Stylists had warned them against it. The risk, the tabloid frenzy, the expectations. But they didn't care. Hand in hand, they stood before the cameras. A pair of artists, not idols. Two people, not personas. When asked by a reporter what made this moment different from before, Eunwoo turned to Jae-young and said, "Because we're no longer pretending." In 2025, Eunwoo bought a quiet house just outside of Jeonju, a small countryside retreat with a garden and a creek. He planted lavender. She planted tomatoes. Together, they adopted a dog, a goofy retriever named Dalgona. They didn't marry right away. In fact, they didn't announce it at all. It was only when a fan spotted matching silver bands during a casual V-Live that the rumor mill spun again. But this time, Eunwoo simply smiled and said, "Yes, we're married." Quietly, on a rainy Tuesday. Just us, a friend officiating, and a plate of tteokbokki after. Jae-young added, "No gown, no tux, just love." Now, years later, they've both taken on new roles, mentors, occasional co-directors, and part-time home buddies. They act less. They write more. They spend evenings reading scripts aloud to each other, critiquing scenes over soju and strawberries. Fans still ship them, but not for drama. For the rarity of what they represent. Two people who didn't let fame ruin love. Who paused when needed. Who grew in different directions, and still met again in the middle. They weren't a fairy tale. They were real. And as Jae-young once wrote in a heartfelt post, "Some love stories are written by fate. Ours? We rewrote it. Over and over. Until it finally felt like home." When Eunwoo and Jae-young returned to Seoul after Berlin, it was the first time in years that they didn't feel like they had to tiptoe around the truth. No more awkward, just close friends answers in interviews. No more fake laughter when MCs teased them about their chemistry. They didn't blast their relationship online either. Instead, they lived in that sweet in-between, the kind of comfort where holding hands in public didn't feel like a rebellion anymore. It just felt right. One evening, over a quiet dinner of kimchi jjigae and fried eggs, Eunwoo glanced at her and said, "It's strange. I used to think love was supposed to be like a drama. Big confessions, dramatic fights, grand gestures. But with you, it feels like I can just breathe." Jae-young smiled, spoon in hand. "That's because we stopped acting." The first place they called theirs was not a luxurious condo in Gangnam or a gated celebrity mansion. It was a slightly dusty studio apartment in Yeonnam-dong, above a small cafe that played soft jazz even in the morning. The move-in was a comedy in itself. They owned exactly one fork, one pot, two bowls, and a mattress that Eunwoo somehow wedged into the stairwell for an hour before realizing it had to be lifted in through the balcony window. On their first night there, they sat cross-legged on the floor, eating instant ramen straight from the pot, steam fogging up their glasses. "I think this is the happiest I've ever been," Eunwoo murmured. Jae-young looked at him like he'd just said something absurd. "Even with only one fork?" He grinned. "Especially with one fork." For a while, life was simple. Morning walks, coffee from the cafe downstairs, reading scripts on the bed with the window open. But the world had other plans. In early 2026, Jae-young was offered the lead in The Paper Swan, a psychological thriller about a woman unraveling after a tragedy. It was dark, demanding, and utterly different from anything she'd done before. At the same time, Eunwoo was approached for his first major Hollywood film, Azure Light, an action romance set in Paris. Suddenly, their cozy one-fork life collided with 18-hour shoot schedules, press tours, and different time zones. At first, they tried to keep their rhythm. But soon, their calls grew shorter. Texts went unanswered for hours. Meals together turned into quick bites between rehearsals. One night, Jae-young came home late, makeup smudged, eyes tired. Eunwoo was sitting at the table, half-eaten curry in front of him. "Are we okay?" he asked softly. She didn't answer right away. She just sank into the chair opposite him. "I don't know." They didn't break up, but they quietly pulled back. Publicly, they were still together. Privately, they gave each other space to breathe. Eun-woo threw himself into training, dialect coaching, action choreography, long days on set. He spent his free time wandering Paris streets alone, coffee in hand, pretending not to notice couples walking by. Jae-young disappeared into her role. She became the paper swan, shutting the world out to live inside the character's pain. Even her co-stars noticed she seemed elsewhere between takes. But in the middle of the silence, they still reached for each other in small ways. She posted a picture of a rainy street in Paris with no caption. He posted a photo of a paper swan floating in his coffee. Fans connected the dots. It was their way of saying, "We're still here. We just can't be loud about it right now." Spring of 2027 arrived with an unusual blessing, 3 weeks where neither had filming commitments. And then it rained. For a week straight, Seoul was soaked in thunder and gray skies. One evening, Jae-young left her agency late. She hadn't brought an umbrella, and she didn't care. Her feet carried her without thinking until she stopped in front of a familiar building. The little cafe in Yeonnam-dong. Their studio apartment. She stood there, dripping wet, hair plastered to her cheeks, when the door opened. Eun-woo stepped out, holding a black umbrella. He didn't look surprised. "You're late," he said softly. She stepped under the umbrella. "I didn't know I was coming here." But they both knew she had. That night, over toast and tea, they talked until dawn. No scripts, no pretending. Just truth. "I don't want a love that fits into my schedule," she whispered. "I want one that expands it." Eun-woo reached across the table, brushing her hand. "Then let's start again." From the rain. Their reunion was quieter this time, but also stronger. They didn't hide. At the 2027 Blue Dragon Awards, they walked in together for the first time, hand in hand. Stylists had warned them against it, worried about headlines, fan backlash, and industry politics. But Eun-woo shrugged. "If they love me, they'll understand. If they don't, then they never did." As they posed for photos, Jae-young leaned over and whispered, "Feels strange." "What?" "Not having to pretend." In 2028, Eun-woo bought a small countryside home in Jeonju. It had a little garden, a creek nearby, and just enough space for 2 people who had learned to value quiet over glitter. They planted lavender, tomatoes. They adopted a golden retriever named Dalgona, who quickly became the spoiled 3rd member of the family. They got married quietly, no wedding gown, no tux. Just a Tuesday afternoon, a close friend officiating, and tteokbokki for dinner. It wasn't a K-drama ending. It was better. Years later, they still act, but less. They write more. They mentor younger actors. They argue over what to plant in spring, or which Ghibli movie to rewatch on rainy nights. Fans still ship them, but for the right reasons now. Not because they look perfect on screen, but because they've shown that love doesn't have to be loud to be lasting. In one rare interview, Jae-young summed it up. "Some love stories are written by fate. Ours? We rewrote it, over and over, until it finally felt like home." And Eun-woo, sitting beside her, simply smiled and added, "And I still laugh at her jokes. Even the bad ones."